The Roman army was not only strong in direct combat, but also excelled at laying some truly treacherous traps. Over the course of centuries, the Romans dominated the battlefield with a series of ingenious snares designed to weaken their enemies and secure victory. And in this video, we will uncover the 7 most terrifying traps employed by the Romans. Traps that left their opponents with no way out. First, stimuli. The stimuli was a Roman trap consisting of sharp obstacles, made chiefly of iron or wood, placed strategically on the ground to slow, snare, or wound enemy soldiers. The stimuli were generally placed in key pathways, such as advance routes, near fortifications, or on battlefields where the enemy would be forced to traverse these areas. In this illustration, we can see a depiction of the siege works carried out by Julius Caesar during the siege of Alesia in 52 BC. Among the various defensive measures, one prominent trap is the stimuli. On the defensive line, to the right, we have stimuli scattered across the field. The main function of this trap was to create difficulties in the movement of opposing forces, turning the ground on which it was installed into a veritable death trap. When they tried to advance, enemy soldiers could be struck by the sharp points, resulting in serious, often disabling wounds. The aim was not only to injure, but also to disrupt enemy ranks, forcing them to hesitate or stop advancing. Besides its physical effect, the stimuli had a significant psychological impact. The mere knowledge that the ground ahead was filled with these traps made enemies hesitate or advance with caution, fearing injury. Second, Lilia. At the heart of Roman warfare, tactics lurked a silent and deadly trap called the Lilia. The Lilia were pits dug in a quincunx pattern that formed 5 intersecting points. In each pit, the Romans placed sharp stakes that became a lethal obstacle for any soldier who fell in. The name Lilia comes from Latin, meaning lilies, because of the shape of the pits. They were carefully camouflaged, usually covered with branches or vegetation, to conceal the danger from the enemy. Often the stakes were made of sturdy wood, and some were even coated with poison or feces, rendering the wound even more fatal. The Lilia were used chiefly to protect strategic areas, such as the surroundings of Roman fortifications. Examples of their use can be found at Hadrian's Wall in England and at the Antonine Wall in Scotland. These traps formed part of a broader defense system that included walls and other barriers, but their main function was to create an invisible snare for the enemy, who never knew whether the next step would be his last. By incorporating these traps into the battlefield, the Romans not only physically injured their enemies, but also caused great psychological impact. In the illustration, a row of lilies appears ahead of the stimuli, forming a lethal line of obstacles. This trap was among the several defenses Caesar used in the siege of Alesia to block any attempt at escape or relief by the Gauls. Third, Cippi. The Cippi were traps used especially during sieges and battles. They consisted of long pits or ditches, generally about 1.5 meters deep. Their shape was often W-shaped, which hindered enemy passage. At the bottom of those pits, the Romans placed obstacles made of sharp tree branches that served to maim and slow soldiers who tried to cross or flee. These obstacle trenches were positioned strategically along advance routes or near areas the Romans wished to protect. The aim was to hamper the movement of enemy troops, particularly those attempting to storm the camps or breach Roman defenses. The combination of the pit's depth and the pointed branches made the Cippi lethal, causing severe injuries as well as slowing the enemy's advance. In the illustration, the Cippi are arranged in rows immediately in front of the lily stakes. They formed a first line of defense in Roman fortifications, acting as an effective barrier against any attempt to push forward. Caesar, in his book De Bello Gallico, describes the use of these obstacles, highlighting their effectiveness in weakening enemy forces. 4. Water-filled ditches, drowning pits. The Romans also used a ditch filled with water to hamper the enemy's advance and protect the fortifications during a siege. In the illustration, we see a ditch filled with water located in front of the Roman defenses as a first line of defense. This type of trap essentially functioned as an aquatic barrier that hindered the attacker's movement and their access to the Roman defences. The flooded ditch created a formidable natural obstacle for the enemy. Enemy forces would have difficulty crossing, especially if the ground was marshy or muddy, which made the passage even more perilous. The water also prevented the effective use of siege engines such as movable towers or ramps, since those machines required firm ground to operate. The water left the soil unstable and made moving those structures extremely difficult. For the besieged, the flooded ditch also hindered any attempt to escape, since they would have to cross this aquatic obstacle, making flight virtually impossible. Patka Service. The service was a fixed trap used by the Romans, designed to be placed below the fortifications and to inflict great damage or capture on enemy forces that tried to breach the defences. Unlike other traps that relied on sharp stakes, the service was composed of branches arranged to create a kind of net or movable obstacle that triggered automatically when touched. The trap's structure consisted of intertwined branches, or branches firmly fixed in the ground, creating a sort of entrapment barrier. When the enemy tried to cross or invade the area, the movement triggered the trap mechanism, causing the branches to move or close, imprisoning or immobilizing soldiers, horses, or enemy equipment. The service was designed to be undetectable until activated, which made it an extremely effective snare, effectively hindering the enemy's advance. Julius Caesar, always meticulous in his sieges, used the service as one of the many barriers encircling the besieged city, alongside the other traps we have already discussed here. He installed the service at the foot of the Roman fortifications as part of the defense system against enemy attacks. The service, together with the other traps, formed an impenetrable defensive belt, heightening the psychological terror among the Gallic defenders and rendering both escape and the arrival of reinforcements impossible. This was crucial to the success of the siege and eventually to the Roman victory at Alesia. 6. Calrops Tribulus. Recently, I made a video dedicated solely to this trap. If you have not seen it yet, I will leave it here in the card for you to watch later. Basically, the caltrops, also known to the Romans as the tribulus or murex ferius, were a trap designed to disrupt enemy cavalry and slow the advance of heavier troops such as war chariots. This weapon consisted of devices with 3 sharp points, normally of iron or wood, which were scattered strategically over the ground. The primary function of the caltrops was to strike enemy horses. During battles such as the Battle of Carrhae in 53 BC, the battlefield was covered with these devices before the combat, creating a treacherous obstacle for the foes. When enemy troops, especially heavy cavalry or chariots, advanced rapidly, the horses stepped on the caltrops, causing serious injuries or even death to the animals. This prevented the movement of the chariots and neutralized the threat posed by enemy forces that depended on the mobility and strength of their cavalry and armed chariots. The Roman writer Vegetius describes how the Romans used caltrops to counter enemies who employed scythe chariots, which were meant to terrorize and wreak havoc on the Roman army. The use of caltrops proved to be a brilliant and effective tactical technique, because without the horses, the enemy chariots became unusable, thereby granting a significant advantage to the Roman army. 7th, camouflaged pits. The strategy of hidden pits was simple but effective. Soldiers dug large holes or trenches in the ground, which were then camouflaged with thin layers of earth, moss, or other natural materials. This created a trap for the enemy, who would remain unaware of the holes until they plunged into them. During the Battle of Lugdunum in the 2nd century AD, one of the largest clashes between Roman armies, the commander of the opposing army, Albinus, used a tactic of camouflaged ditches to deceive the Roman troops. Albinus had his troops advance to a line of trenches covered with earth, leading Severus's army to believe that the ground was clear. When the Romans advanced, they fell into the trenches, resulting in disaster for their troops. Another notable example comes from the Battle of Treacherous between the Byzantines and the Sassanids. The Sassanids dug trenches and concealed pits along their path. When the Roman army commanded by Belisarius advanced unwittingly, they fell into the traps, resulting in heavy losses for the Romans. the use of hidden ditches helped to neutralize the enemy's numerical advantage. So, what did you think of these traps used by the Romans? Which one do you believe was the most frightening? Leave your opinion in the comments, and if you enjoyed this video, hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. We'll see you in the next video.